Hello,
Hello.
how are you?
I'm well, and you?
Good, thank you.
I feel like I know you already because we watched you every day during COVID, and you were the reassuring presence in our lives that whole time.
Why, thank you.
You made a huge difference for us.
Why, thank you. That's very nice of you.
Yeah. So, I guess you saw that I'm writing a biography of Albert Sabin.
Yeah, 1 second. Hold on. One
Okay.
second. Let me just go grab some water because I have a little bit of a cold and I lose my voice halfway through.
Okay.
1 second.
All right, deal.
Sorry, Karen. I was going to think about canceling this, but I figured we probably wouldn't get it on the calendar for another month or so. So I figured let's do it. Okay, so where do you want to start?
I wanted to know how you met Albert Sabin and what the occasion was, what it was like when you met him.
Okay. I think it's a really interesting story. Um, Obviously, as a young scientist, I had heard of this great hero of polio vaccine, Albert Sabin. Excuse me. Um, I had finished my medical residency at the New York Hospital Cornell Medical Center in 1968, and I came down to the NIH under the tutelage of Sheldon M. Wolf, who was the clinical director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, the institute that I ultimately came to lead for 38 years as the director. I came down as a trainee, and early on in my fellowship, Shelley Wolf had known Albert Sabin. Just hold on 1 second. I'm sorry, just hold on.
Okay.
Sorry, Karen. That was my doorbell. Shelley Wolf had known Albert for some years through the usual infectious diseases circles. As it turned out, Albert developed a urinary tract infection and was quite sick. It wasn't just something you could treat as an outpatient. So he was admitted to the hospital, our hospital at the NIH. And Shelley, considering me his top young doc, assigned the young Tony Fauci to be the person who is going to take care of Albert Sabin, which introduced me to the unusual personality of Albert Sabin. So I walked into the room and he looked at me rather skeptically, a young doctor. Like, what is this young whippersnapper doing in my room? And at the time, I quite frankly, with all due modesty, was quite a skilled clinician. So I was not, I was very respectful of him, but I was very confident in my capabilities. So during the course of the history and physical, he questioned everything I did. I did not get annoyed, but I just calmly answered, "Why are you doing that? Why are you taking this blood? What did you feel in my abdomen? What do you think it is?" Blah, 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 blah. And he was not overtly grumpy, but he was not quite friendly. So I didn't really know. And after about an hour and a half of a very thorough physical examination and a very thorough history, I said, "Okay, I'm going to get the results of the test. I'll talk to you later." I walked out to leave the room. And as I was getting to leave the room, he said, "Dr. Fauci." No, he didn't say Dr. Fauci. He said, "Young man," with his booming voice. So I turned around and he said, "I will allow you to come back. You did a good job." So I think that just personifies completely Albert Sabin. As it turned out, over the years, I became very close to Albert. And I was asked by Eloisa to be one of the people to give the eulogy at his burial at Arlington National Cemetery. So it went from the young whippersnapper who he allowed to come back into the room to somebody that his family asked to give the eulogy at his funeral.
That's amazing. Actually, I should ask, do you mind if I record this?
Of course, go ahead.
And so it looks like I have to send you a request and you have to say okay.
There you go.
Okay, perfect. So you stayed friends after that. You continued to be his doctor, followed up with him with the urinary tract infection and
Yeah, but he got well after that. And then he developed some neurological problems that were out of my area of expertise, some peripheral neuropathies. So he then came under the care of other physicians. But for some strange reason, he took a very particular liking to me and sort of semi-adopted me as his protege, and continually would follow my career very closely. And as I got more accomplished and better known, I got this big award at the Cosmos Club in Washington. And he insisted that he be there to present the award to me.
Oh,
So I got this great photo of him with his arm around me, both of us with tuxes on. So,
oh, that's wonderful.
yeah, no, we stayed close for years. He would invite me over his house for dinner, particularly after he married Eloisa. He was very fond of my wife. They got to know each other pretty well. So that's really it. But the answer to your question, when was the first time I met him, was in that circumstance in the hospital room at the NIH Clinical Center.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like you passed some kind of test that he had, and
I did. He gave me permission to come back.
I'm not surprised by that sort of interaction with him. What I'm a little bit surprised at is it seems like his personality is so different from yours.
Yeah, very much so. Most people consider me and I hate to say this because it's presumptuous to evaluate yourself, but most people consider me quite a humble person, given the degree of my accomplishments.
Hmm.
Albert accomplished amazing things, but had very little humility. The other thing that is very different, and I love the man, I'm saying he had very little humility, but I love him, is that unlike me, I am very non-confrontational. So if somebody says something that's not correct, I'm not the kind that yells out, "Oh, you're wrong." That kind. I just, stay back and be calm about it. If Albert Sabin didn't like what you were doing, he absolutely let you know about it, without a doubt. He was, but in some respects, it was oddly acceptable to the community because he was so brilliant. You see, if he were a lesser mind, people would say, "Who the hell is that guy criticizing Joe Blow or Joe Schmo?" But when Albert did it, it was, well, he's one of the smartest people around, probably the smartest guy in the room. So we'll allow him to step out of line and say something like that. The other thing about him that was remarkable is that even at an old age, where his hearing was failing and he had neurological abnormalities, he would attend scientific conferences, sit in the first row, and with rapt attention follow every single thing that the speaker was saying. And at the end of the presentation, he would always have very insightful questions. That was very characteristic. And he was a little bit intimidating because if somebody didn't know him and you're getting ready to give a presentation, and all of a sudden this old man with a cane comes up and sits in the first row, it could be a bit unnerving to a younger person.
I would think so.
Yep.
So, as a scientist, it sounds like everyone respected him as a scientist and as a great intellect. Do you feel like he tried to teach you and mentor you in that way, and did it affect your work later in life?
He took a very interesting approach with me in mentoring. It was what I would call broadly generic. And let me explain what I mean. During the time when we knew each other and had a relationship, we were hot and heavy working on developing an HIV vaccine. And since Albert Sabin is the dean of vaccinology, he used to look at the data and say, "Tony, I really don't think we're going to develop an HIV vaccine. I think that this virus is much too complicated and clever for us to develop a vaccine." And 40 years later, he's right. We don't have a vaccine yet. We may get one, but what he appreciated early on, before the scientists' own data indicated it, that the standard way of developing a vaccine which he and Jonas Salk and others had done, just was not going to work with HIV. The nature of the virus and the nature of the immune response to the virus was such that the body did not like to make a good immune response against HIV. And Albert insightfully saw that and was very vocal about that, much to the chagrin of the scientific community who was trying to develop a vaccine. Albert would say, in a typical, unabashed way, I don't think you guys are ever going to develop a vaccine against HIV. And that was unnerving for the people who were trying, because when Albert Sabin says that, you know, you don't necessarily have to believe it, but you notice it. And he was unashamed to say that publicly.
But do you think for him it was, obviously he was brilliant, but do you think there was some sort of intuition as well? Or how was he able to put together so much information and be right all the time?
Well, it's just, I mean, it's not surprising. I mean, there are scientists, I hope I'm among them, but other people will judge that who instinctively can look at a situation and get a pretty good feel for how it's going to turn out. He just had so much experience in what it takes to get a good, effective vaccine. He didn't see those pieces of the puzzle falling into place with HIV. And that's why he was quite, as I use the word, unashamed to say, you know, in fact, he even told me to my face, you may be wasting your time, Tony. Like, ouch.
But he wasn't afraid to tell you.
No, he wasn't. The other thing that you might not hear from other people, which is he was not a perfect man. Okay? He had his faults. He was a bit homophobic. And would sometimes say things that would make me cringe. But, you know, love him or leave him. And I loved him, so I didn't leave him. But that was one of the things that disappointed me. He would say sometimes some disparaging things about gay people, about their conduct, as if it was, you know, bordering from completely unseemly to criminal, you know, that kind of thing. He was not kindly towards the gay population. I mean, particularly when he was commenting about HIV, almost like it's the wrath of God for what they're doing.
Oh, interesting.
Which is unfortunate. I had to tell you that because it's, you know, I'm telling you all the good things about it, but that was one of the things that made me cringe, you know.
Oh, I'm sure. He wasn't racist, though.
No, not at all. Not at all.
But
he was put it this way. Let me put it kindly, so it doesn't look like Tony Fauci's being sharply critical of Albert, because I love the guy. I think he was unsympathetic to the gay community in their plight with HIV. He was unsympathetic.
Well, and it may be that he loved women so much that he just couldn't understand any other approach to life.
I think you have a point there. You know, he was a ladies' man, for sure. Much more so before I knew him, but he still had that flare in his eye, even when I knew him. So it's entirely understandable that something that's antithetical to a heterosexual relationship would rub him wrong.
Yeah. But that's interesting to know. I'm glad you told me that.
Yeah.
Um, one other one other puzzle to me is how he could deny VAP, how he could deny vaccine-associated paralytic polio. Being the scientist that he was and being so careful and honest, he never accepted it.
No. Well, Karen, I think you probably know, sometimes very brilliant people have blind spots. And as long as we're being totally honest, because I think you want to write an honest book about him, is that was very ego involved with his work.
Hmm.
The competition between him and Jonas Salk is of historic magnitude. All right? I mean, one could write a book only about that.
Yes.
And anything that would influence negatively the fact that his discovery of the oral polio, or his development of the oral polio vaccine, he could not accept that, even though it was a reality looking him straight in the face. He couldn't accept it. He was so deeply ego involved with his accomplishment, and anything that would detract even a little bit from it, he couldn't accept.
So
Even great people have tragic flaws.
yeah, that was the one that surprised me the most, because he seemed so meticulous and so fact-based in his research. So yeah, I get that explanation. That makes sense to me now that you say it. The other thing I wondered about is how he could not have a good relationship with those two daughters that he waited for so long for, and he just could not seem to get along with them. I don't know if you knew them at all.
I did not.
Yeah. I got to know them. I interviewed them both and spent about 3 days with his older daughter, Debbie. But he was a hard father and husband. So, and the other thing I don't understand is his temper, where that came from. He had that explosive temper that allowed him to, for instance, throw chairs at one of his fellows, or just really have outrageous eruptions at people for things. And I don't know where that came from, because it doesn't seem like he grew up with that kind of thing.
Karen, you're trying to psychoanalyze a guy, which is part of your job as an author, but I don't know if I can help you with that. I mean, he's not the first highly accomplished person who has a lot of, I wouldn't want to be quoted on this, but if I were to analyze it, sometimes you meet people who the force and the energy within them is partially responsible for their greatness.
Mm.
But it sometimes decompresses and expresses itself in very unseemly ways. So, I mean, he's almost like a powder keg of mostly productive energy that allowed him to do unusual and remarkable things. And sometimes when the wrong door on that powder keg opens, you get somebody throwing a chair at a fellow.
Yeah.
So I'm not at all surprised. I never saw him do that. I never experienced, but the fact that you're telling me he did doesn't faze me even a little bit.
Yeah. Now, there are some examples like that, but I think that he was such a great humanitarian, and he did things well into the time when almost everybody else retires, like you. He felt his job wasn't finished. He still had contributions, and he traveled and he did things and he told government leaders what to do and how to do it. I'm in awe of him.
No, he's a great man, a complicated but great man,
Yeah.
which is the reason why people write books about him.
He does not have a book about him.
Well, you're going to write a book about him.
I am. Yeah, I am so surprised that there isn't, because he's so much more interesting, for instance, than Salk. He did so many other things and was so interested and made so many contributions. And he was a war hero. He made huge differences wherever he went and was unselfish with his time. So I'm really surprised. But so if you were writing this biography of him, what would you want people to take away from it? What would you want them to especially remember?
Well, I kind of danced around it a little bit. Is I would like them to walk away understanding the profound complexity of a great man who made a contribution that helped change the world. It was not a simple daddy good shoes who, got up and decided he was going to make a vaccine and walked into the sunset and all was well and good. He was a, you know, uh, intellectually brilliant, um, totally ego involved, um, had generosity and humanity on the one hand, and abruptness and insensitivity on the other.
Hmm.
He's just a very complicated guy
Mm-hmm.
who did an amazing thing.
Mm-hmm. Did he ever talk to you, or were you involved at all in the swine flu affair in the 70s?
No,
He took a stand along with everyone else in the beginning that they should make a vaccine for the swine flu because they were afraid it was going to end up like the 1918
right.
epidemic. And then when he saw that there weren't any other cases, he changed his mind, and nobody else did. But he was very strongly adamant that they shouldn't be vaccinating everyone with a new vaccine that had been developed so fast, if they could stockpile it and get people immunized if they needed to. So he was, after that, no one would listen to him, and Salk became Ford's scientist of choice, but he never backed off from that, and he was right,
He was totally right.
like so many other times in his life. So you gotta admire a guy like that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
The other thing I was going to ask is if his methodology with his making his vaccine has had an effect on other vaccines since then. If for instance, if people use his methodology that he used for the polio vaccine, and it's had an influence on future vaccines that have been made.
Yeah. I mean, some of the influenza vaccines were live attenuated. The measles vaccine is live attenuated. A lot of the really, really good vaccines were live attenuated vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
Only recently, in the last couple of decades, has the molecular approach towards recombinant DNA technology taken over in the vaccine world, like the mRNA with COVID and some of the protein and recombinant ones with hepatitis. But subsequent to that technology, which he didn't invent, but he used it, a number of very successful vaccines came along that were live attenuated. I think measles was one of the most important ones.
Mm-hmm. So the other question I was going to ask you is, if you knew anything about his cancer virus research.
No, not at all.
Okay, we'll have to talk about that then. What about his relationship with Gallo?
Only vaguely. What point do you make? What's the question?
They seem like they would be similar personality types, and I didn't know if they agreed on things or if they helped each other or they were antagonistic. You know, they both seem like really strong personalities.
No, I don't think there was any notable antagonism. I just think, two big egos, they each thought, knowing Albert, I think Albert would be more dismissive of Bob than Bob would be of Albert.
Okay. So, can you describe his, what a dinner party would be like with them? What did you talk about, and what was?
We talked about world affairs. He was very much interested in world affairs. By the way, I have another Zoom I have to get on now.
Yeah, I
Karen.
see. Well,
Yeah.
I so appreciate all the time you gave me. This has
All
been
right, my pleasure.
wonderful.
All righty, take care.
Thanks, you too.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.